The app is unusual. It is really different in a good way, and it can create beautiful paintings, but actually today we're looking at it as a teaching tool. I was struggling to paint digitally or traditionally, especially with figures, as you can see here, but now I'm much more confident, and discovering Heavy Paint, I remember it was a breakthrough moment for me. So my name's Kenzo, and this is Love Life Drawing. So I had a really good painting teacher, Jared Cullum. I also had really good books like Color and Light. Here, I'm using it to hold up the microphone, but Color and Light. And I watched countless tutorials and stuff like that, but I was just struggling to apply this information in practice. What I needed to do wasn't rocket science. I needed to focus my practice on large and simple shapes. So I knew that I needed to think primarily in terms of the value structure of the painting. So how light and dark different areas were, and that value structure needed to be really simple. I needed to keep control over where I was putting strong contrast in the values. We have a video that explains why that is difficult but really important. I'll link to it below. And I knew that when I was going to introduce color, I needed to keep control of my saturation levels. Again, I have a video about why that's really important. And then I could think about how I can vary my color temperatures. As soon as I got into the actual painting software or broke out the gouache paint, I'd quickly make a mess, and then I'd become desperate to try and just make it look good. And in that desperation, I'd think maybe it'll look good if I kind of smudge the paint around or try this other technique. And then I'd forget about those big simple shapes and the value structure, and everything would go out the window. When I was using gouache, I was thinking about the brush technique, the color mixing, the consistency of the paint. So even when I was trying to keep it simple, there was lots of muscle memory with handling the paint that I didn't have. There was lots of intuition with color mixing that I didn't have. And then at first, when I was doing digital painting in Procreate on the iPad, I found that so much was opened up to me. I could achieve any color in the universe in an instant, any type of brush and smudging tool, all these layers, all sorts of effects. And you can see that my original drawing here is okay in terms of keeping it simple, but as soon as I start trying to paint it, I'm all over the place. You know, I keep trying to push the colors around and blend them and smudge them, flip-flopping between tools. It's like going to a restaurant with 100 things on the menu. I was constantly distracted and straying from what mattered. You know what? In Rocky, Mick, his trainer, needs to force Rocky into good habits with his stance. So he ties string between his feet to limit his footwork.
If you can move and you can hit without breaking the string, you can balance, you become a very dangerous person.
And Heavy Paint ended up being my Mick the trainer. So in the past, some of my best teachers, I think, have been materials. When I was being too tentative and cautious, a pen really helped me to commit. When I was being too detail-oriented and finicky with my lines, a crayon really helped me to use my whole arm and loosen up. I saw a painting by Tiffany Mang and a demo by an artist called Heather In. So I thought, these look cool, really clear, defined, simple shapes, and the interface looks limited. So I downloaded Heavy Paint. This app for me really pushed me to think about combining big simple shapes to depict something, and it wouldn't really let me do anything else. I couldn't really push the paint around in a million different nuanced ways. There wasn't that much I could do in terms of technique other than really define my shapes. So I followed Heather In's demo first, then I tried to recreate Tiffany Mang's painting. And then it was time to try it on my own. And I'm not saying I could instantly paint, I'm saying that I could start learning to paint without constantly straying off course. Heavy Paint wouldn't let me go down the wrong path. The only tools that it provided were big shape tools. There's this one where you define shapes by drawing their edges. I couldn't be too fancy with that. I just had to be clear about my shapes. And also I used the straight line tool, which was really like a rectangle tool a lot. I found that the shapes Heavy Paint encouraged tended to have quite good design because it was hard to put down really convoluted or vague shapes with lots of little thin lines and jagged edges. The shapes tended to be quite chunky, like the ones we learned about in the Shapes video and from Cynics, which is another YouTuber that I like. And the final thing that I loved about Heavy Paint was the color picker. So this is the Procreate color picker, and it's beautiful. You can browse infinite colors in this seamless way. But Heavy Paint is different. The Heavy Paint system forced me to think about color in terms of its 3 basic characteristics separately, individually. I had to think about the value and then separately think about the saturation and then the hue itself. So it really helped me to be clear about what I needed in my colors. Now, I did find that it was hard to do figures or portraits in Heavy Paint for some reason. I found it a lot easier to try and do like still life, for example. I don't know why that is, probably something to do with me, but when I went back to Procreate to paint figures, I was in a much better place. Now I had that confidence to know a little bit more what I wanted to do. I limited myself to one brush and mostly one layer because I knew that what I needed was to focus on the things that matter. The brush that I used was one from Cynics, so I will link to it below. Now I'm in the habit of sticking to big simple shapes as I paint figures and constantly revisiting shapes to ensure that any details I've added haven't taken away from my bigger shapes. So in this sketch, can you see that I got some pretty big simple shapes in her figure? But then when it came to her face, because it's a tricky angle, I kind of lost the plot a bit. I got dragged into the details of her features. And then Jared, you know, the teacher that I mentioned, reminded me that what mattered was the big simple shapes, and then I was able to fix it. So it's so easy to forget and get dragged back into irrelevant details, but once I went back to my big simple shapes, now I'm super happy with how it turned out. Now, this video is partly about Heavy Paint, which I really like, but really it's about how you need to push yourself to stay on those big simple shapes in your drawings and paintings as much as you can. So any tools or exercises that help you do that are going to be beneficial. So you can do collage, for example, with colored paper. I've never tried that, but it's the same thing. You need to define your shapes. You would use scissors this time, and you'd use colored paper to create your figure. You could paint in Photoshop or Procreate only with the select tool. So you would select an area and then kind of fill it in, right? So sometimes you're drawing or painting something that seems to be made up of lots of little shapes, like this guy's muscular back. And when that happens, you need to squint your eyes and ensure that you merge as much of that detail away and see the biggest shapes you can and put those down and keep those as the visual priority. But then you can vary things a little bit within those bigger shapes. It doesn't take a lot of contrast or variation to indicate smaller forms within the big areas of light and dark, and still maintain your big simple shapes while you do it. So from what I can tell, Heavy Paint is created by one guy. His name, I think, is Vaughn Ling, and I'll link to his Instagram and stuff below. But he must be some kind of genius because he's really good at art and he can create this app, which is crazy. You can get it for free on almost any type of device that you have, but you pay like $5 or something to unlock certain features, which I think is worth doing, especially if it helps him to create, and improve it, which he's constantly doing. I saw some reviews of Heavy Paint, people complaining about it, because it's not as polished and developed as something like Procreate. But you got to realize that this is from an independent creator, and it's cool because of the not limitations, but because of how focused it is on what it does. So anyway, the other thing I want to mention is that I also, the title of this video is "This App Taught Me to Paint," but I had a really good painting teacher too, Jared Cullum. I'm going to link his YouTube channel below because he's really cool as well. We have a guide called Life Drawing Success. It's about the big mistake in my learning process that led to lots of other mistakes and really slowed me down by about 10 years in my life drawing progression. You can download it with the link below. There should be some other cool videos from us on the screen, so check one of them out, and I'll see you next time.